Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for showing up and participating in the first Talent Academy specific webinar. And Laurence Halsted kindly being on board with the True Athlete project to share a little bit of wisdom with us in terms of long-term development and retention predominantly, but I'm sure we'll get a glimpse into all sorts of club relevant and athlete development relevant subjects. I'll not preamble too much, so I think I'll just hand over to you, Laurence, if you're good to go. Nice. If you maybe want to shortly introduce yourself to the team and then crack on from there.
Yeah, thanks, Nico. Yeah, so I've got this nice presentation that I start with an introduction. So yeah, I'm Laurence. I was an athlete for 10 years in the British fencing team. I competed in 2 Olympic Games in London and Rio. After Rio, I both got a job. I live in Denmark now. I live in Copenhagen. I've been here for 10 years. And as soon as I retired, I was very lucky to get a job as the performance director for the Danish Fencing Federation. And I was doing that for 5 years. But at the same time, in 2016, I joined this charity called the True Athlete Project as a volunteer. It was a very small charity, just starting up in the UK, and we were all volunteers. And I kind of helped grow the charity, but I was ostensibly the director of mentoring. So, and I still am. Tasked with creating a mentoring program for athletes, it's elite Olympic level athletes, mentoring young athletes, and that program's grown into just a wonderful part. I'll talk a bit more about that later, actually. I also kind of, alongside the work I do with TAP, with the charity, I do some consultancy in kind of one-to-one coaching in sport, in business, academia even. And I also get to call myself an author because I wrote a book a few years ago, 2021, on the right-hand side, called it's all about the philosophy of the True Athlete Project, called Becoming a True Athlete. And yeah, so what we're gonna, when Nico asked me to talk about long-term athlete development, firstly, I didn't have a ton of time. We were starting talking about this last week, so I didn't have something completely bespoke, but what it spoke to me about was this idea of meaningful talent development, which is something I have thought a lot about, and I've given talks like this before. And it's also very close. It kind of encompasses what we're all about in the True Athlete Project. We want to kind of reimagine sport and to create a more compassionate, more holistic culture of sport, and kind of just improve performance, but well-being and the general experience of athletes. So I'm sure you'll see that come through in this little presentation. So what we're going to talk about, I'm going to start with my own personal journey through kind of towards more meaning and more meaningful experience in sport, to kind of a wider perspective on what the purpose, the meaning of sport is today and could be. Then description of what meaningful talent development is. And then what everyone's hoping for and looking for is, what does that actually mean in practice? I know all of you guys can get interested in some of the other stuff, but get excited about what it actually looks like. So we're a small group, so I just thought, if I'm totally happy to take questions along the way. If anyone has something burning, chuck it in the chat. I might not see it, but or you can just unmute and jump in. I'm fine with that. Otherwise, we've got some time at the end for Q&As, so you're welcome to save questions up for that. So my own experience of kind of deepening my sense of meaning in sport. I've been in fencing all my life, but back when I was a junior, my experience was I was a very kind of self-centered young junior athlete on the national team. I was pretty good for my age, but I was not a particularly pleasant teammate or person to be around lots of times. Like I said, it was kind of egotistic, very self-centered. I was actually kicked out of a world championships in my final junior year for causing trouble, and something that I was not very proud of, you can imagine. But that's kind of where my elite sports career started, in that space. all the way through kind of the earlier first half of my senior career, I had this approach that was where the results just weighed incredibly heavily. So I took winning and losing. I took especially losing, because you lose most of the time in senior elite level. I took losing incredibly hard, and that kind of weighed on my sense of self and my identity, and all of my understanding of the meaning of sport was wrapped up in my results. So of course it was going to kind of reflect back on who I felt I was as a person if I wasn't going well. London 2012, the year preparing for the London Olympics, was a major kind of turning point for me. I got injured, got my first major injury in Olympic year, having kind of being a shoe-in for being part of the Olympic team. Home games. I'm from London, so that was just like 6 years of training for that moment. And then I broke my wrist on my sword arm in January of 2012, and went through a really dark period, as you can imagine. 4 months out of training, just doing rehab, getting surgery to put these pins in and like wire up the entire wrist. But I also got to start working with an amazing sports psychologist, and the work we did, kind of intense work over a few months leading up to those games, kind of sowed the seeds for a total revolution in my approach to performance, but to sport as well. And I ended up getting selected for those games, and just I really credit it, like the work I did with her around values and but just changing my approach to performance was why I could turn up, why I could get myself to a place that was both ready to perform, but also in a place that I could be proud of. Because that, when I was in that dark period, I was really not a very nice person to be around. And then that period from my first Olympics to the second was also just unrecognizable to the time before. I'd moved to Denmark. I actually took a year off after the London Olympics because it was such a roller coaster ride. Moved to Denmark, and now I was training, kind of doing my own training program here. And I came back to the team with a totally kind of different ethos about it. I needed sport to be. I needed my sport. If I was going to do this, it needed to be more about the kind of joy of sport and less about the grind of it. I started thinking a little bit broader. So I wrote an article in the Guardian about the Rio Olympics and some kind of the ethical concerns around the Olympics generally. First time I'd ever started thinking kind of outside of my own bubble. And it was also a time of my absolutely the most consistent and best performance of my entire career. And it was totally down to this kind of, I'd call it a 180 shift in how I approached performance. Suddenly the results were far less meaningful. I still could enjoy the wins, but the losses meant nothing in the same way. I would get over them in minutes rather than in weeks. So and it all culminated in the Olympics. I didn't get a medal or anything, but I had an experience that just showed me that this approach to performance was just there was so much more potential in this than all of that I'd kind of built up to in the earlier part of my career, where the results were just meant everything. And that kind of kicked off. Sam, who's the founder of TAP, saw my article in the Guardian, reached out, and we connected, and then I started kind of getting involved from straight after the Olympics. And that should say till 2024, but that's been an ongoing kind of journey of opening up and exploring really what a deeper meaning and understanding of sport can look like. So that was my own thing. The background for this kind of meaningful talent development approach, I think it's no surprise to anyone working in sport these days that there's something, you might not call it a crisis, but there's something of a crisis in elite sport when we see all of these examples of kind of mental health problems, high levels of burnout and dropout, the transition out of sport leading to identity crises, these examples of toxic environments where athletes are being physically or mentally abused, even sexually abused. If you watch that documentary Athlete A, and I think what it kind of all this points to is that we've lost track of the core values and meaning of sport. Actually, that's what all of this is suggesting that where what sports the beauty and the real value of sport is being lost along the way when all of this can kind of come in under the guise of high performance. And this is happening all over the world. So I just out of interest, did a little tally of all the sports who had these kind of toxic cultures come out, revelations about their toxic cultures. So it's all over the world, and it's a bit of an epidemic. This list is probably a bit old. I'm sure there's a few more coming out now. And this, I saw this on Twitter the other day. I'll just leave you to read it. It's a pretty punchy quote. And I think it just sums up, if you read this, how on earth could we have got to the point where this is possible, where somebody looking after coaching an athlete could think that this is the right way to go. And actually, when you look back through the history of sport, you realize that it's not always been like this. This kind of medals at all costs, performance focus is relatively recent. Probably would all recognize that. But you go further back in history, and sport was kind of used as an agenda for various things. So going back, it was used as a training method for developing soldiers, and then for developing the workforce in the Industrial Revolution. It's been a kind of plaything of the upper classes and reserved to the upper classes. So it's not as if this is the way that sport is and always has been. It's been kind of has a different sense about it, shifting all the way through the times. Just feels like this it's been kind of 30 odd years of this model. And I think what we need to do is we need to ask this question. It's so relevant. I was talking about it in a meeting this morning. What does sport need? What does society need from sport today? We don't need to train soldiers. We don't need to train workers. But what do we need? And I was inspired by Jigoro Kano, who's the creator of judo, and he describes that the purpose of judo is to perfect yourself and contribute something of value to the world. And actually, if you look into some of the martial arts, there's quite a few of them that have a very similar kind of underlying philosophy, which is about developing self and helping others. There's interestingly, it only seems to be the Eastern martial arts that have anything like this underlying philosophy. It's something that I think we've lost in modern Western sport. I couldn't come across it's like I say that there's no others in Western sport, no other Western sports that have anything like this as a founding philosophy, except I think for Ultimate Frisbee. And there, I'm not sure if it's described so kind of succinctly, but it's definitely there's a definite kind of philosophical element foundation to it. There's a wonderful book by Jigoro Kano, a very small book about the philosophy of judo, but it boils down to this. And at TAP, we kind of came up with our own, through writing that book, our own higher purpose of sport. Answering the question of what we need what society needs from sport today, which is to create a more compassionate, vibrant, and peaceful world. And to do that, we need to develop, we think, true athletes that have all these kind of special traits about them. And that's the focus of our work, is developing true athletes through kind of quite special programming, often based on mindfulness practices and drawing on all sorts of inspiration. But we do work with athletes and coaches basically to this end. But meaningful talent development. So this is getting to the heart of it now. What do I mean by meaningful talent development? It's a topic that's come about, I noticed it kind of come up as a theme a few years ago. There's a podcast called Meaningful Sport by Nora Ronkkinen, a Finnish researcher, which is cool. I think it's kind of taking on it's gaining traction because it's this kind of antidote to what people are starting to realize has been a somewhat meaningless approach to talent development, which is basically just the one that tries to get athletes to the senior level and senior athletes to the top of the podium. And it's just been proved time and time again how meaningless that is. If that's all there is to a program, there's no substance to it. The athletes that get there look back and think and are asking the question, and there are high profile athletes who have done this publicly. They're asking the question, is that all there is? Is that what it was? That's not what I was promised. They thought that their lives would be sorted out, they'd be happy when they got there, and it was nothing of the sort. So this is a kind of the antidote to meaningless talent development, which is just the pure result focused approach. So what does this involve? It's about having a long-term approach to developing the whole person, not just the performer. It's about helping everybody in the system to thrive, both in their sporting career but also in life. It's about focusing on the most meaningful aspects of an athlete's journey: personal development, relationships, new and unique experiences. These really are, when you get to the end of a long career in sport, these are the things I've asked a lot of my friends and athletes who have done this, gone a lot even further than me. These are the things that you look back on and think they make you really proud, that you end up kind of cherishing the memories of. The medals and the trophies, their shine tarnishes over time, but these things stay with you. And then it's an approach that kind of connects to this wider role that sport has in society. And as I see it, performance, driving for performance, and kind of a competitive approach are the tools, are the vehicles to achieve these things. They're not the ends in themselves. That's kind of at the heart of the mistake we've made. We've put performance at the center. The competition is the purpose. And that, as I've just said, I don't think it's not pregnant with any meaning. But actually, when you see performance and competition as the vehicle, as the driver of developing all of these things, then it begins to make more sense. So the fact that there's a competition coming and that we want to perform our best is just the most fertile ground for personal development. And when you're a team, the idea of building your relationships like that, it's just an amazing space to build relationships when you have to create your team around you, or you're part of a team. And of course, they just provide incredible experiences. I love, this is a book I loved recently. It's called Corporate Rebels. It's from the corporate space, but this is where I got that idea about the results, the performance being the driver. Profit is important, of course. It funds the pursuit of purpose, but it should be the means, not the end. Profit for a company is like oxygen for a human, necessary to stay alive, but not the reason for living. So competition and performance is necessary for elite sport, for performance sport, obviously, but it's not the reason for it, or it shouldn't be the reason for it. There's a higher purpose that is driving towards, in my opinion. So what does it look like? This is obviously going to be a limited exposition of what this kind of thing can look like. From our experience in TAP and some of the work that we do and that I've seen being done, would be a great topic to bring up into the discussion afterwards, what you guys have noticed around these things. But I'll kick it off anyway. So 3 parts to what I think it looks like in practice, and then I will come back to some very specific examples. So we need to offer athletes an experience where they choose to stay longer in sport. I can sometimes come across as a bit of a critic of sport because of this kind of, I see what the potential can be, and I don't think we're living up to it very much. But that's only because I'm an absolute evangelist for the power of sport, and the fact that it's not living up to its true kind of value is such a crying shame. I think we need to, we want to keep people involved in sport as long as possible, and that's the only way that they'll gain the real benefits of it. So how do we offer an experience where people choose to stay longer? I think this is also, you guys working on the pathway level, you'll recognize this is one of the single major issues, is keeping talent or just athletes involved and choosing to stay in the sport rather than choosing to go off partying, studying, doing whatever their friends are. Like, why should they choose performance sport these days when it's so tough and there's no guarantee of success? It'll be long plateaus. I'm sure you recognize all that. And so we have to offer the experience that really makes it meaningful for them to stay around longer. We need to develop the skills that will help them in the long run, not just to win. And we need to help them and everyone around them see what is truly meaningful in their journey in sport. So if you had asked me as a 18-year-old what was meaningful, I'd have had a very different response to what I say today. But I refuse to believe that I would have been ignorant. I would have kind of denied it had I been kind of given some of the messages by people I trusted. I think we can do a lot. I might not have been able to kind of approach this, my current thinking about it back then at 18, but I think I could have been helped a little bit earlier than kind of waiting 10 years to figure it out with the help of a major injury and a world-class sports psychologist. I think we can do some of that a bit earlier. So offering athletes an experience of sport where they choose to stay longer. So we need to make it fun. I think that's becoming more and more kind of culturally relevant, that people understand. I mean, certainly for the younger years, it just needs to be fun. And this idea that performance sport isn't fun, just isn't fun, I don't buy that at all. We know that there are lots of times in performance sport that are not fun and you have to grind it out, but it should also be at least connected to that original joy that we all feel when we get the reason why we want to do this sport with all of our spare time. Like, we get into that because of the joy that it gives us. Like, we can't just let go of all of that and cut the chain because we think that elite sport just isn't fun. We need to be inspired by self-determination theory when we're thinking about the environments we have. So autonomy, competence, belonging should be absolutely the center of the environments that we're creating. And there is a movement for kind of an understanding of the power of giving athletes a say in their development and in the environments that they're part of. And then a big one, they need to have the necessary support, physically, mentally, emotionally. I am now, the earlier part of my career, I didn't have much interest in sports psychology until I started working with this wonderful lady in 2012. And ever since then, I've just had the greatest respect for what's possible when we train our minds. And I think part of the issue with kind of the struggles that young athletes go through at the moment is that they're not particularly well equipped. They're not, I mean, in society these days, we know we're seeing young people who are less resilient than their parents were, or than previous generations, and we can't just expect them to become more resilient, even with sport as a vehicle for it. We need to be able to support them in it, and training kind of an understanding of psychology and the performance psychology is is one of the best ways that I can think of to help athletes have a better experience, not just performance wise, but we know that it should benefit their performance, but also just the experience of kind of dealing with the ups and downs, dealing with the losses. It's such a key part. So when I started as the PD of Danish fencing, I had a very small budget. We're a small federation. I was the only person working in the performance side, so I had a tiny budget to work with. I brought in a sports psychologist right from the start to work all the way through, from our youngest athletes on the national squad were 14 odd, all the way up to the senior elite level. We had a group of 8 elite athletes. He would work in training camps with kind of all the juniors. He'd have monthly sessions with all the seniors, and I also brought him into my senior leadership team with the head coaches. So he'd be part of the meetings to kind of help influence the environments we're creating. So I absolutely prioritize above almost anything else the kind of the creation of this psychologically informed environment. And I have no doubt that that was a big factor in why people were happier to stick around, why people were enjoying their experience in these squads more than they had done before. This is partly about kind of making things fun, but also just an example from my experience. When I arrived as the PD, I was actually the first PD. They only had head coaches. They hadn't hired a PD before. This was what a traditional training camp looked like. This was the schedule made by the Hungarian coach that before me, who used to run all the training camps. This was their program. It's in Danish. It's easy to translate. It says fencing, and footwork. That's all it is. Actually, in this one, there's not even any footwork, but there is one workshop on mental training. So it's just fencing and pause. So at this time, before I got there, training camps were obligatory for all national squad athletes. There was something like 50 national squad athletes, from junior, under 14-year-old up to senior. And this was what the program looked like for a weekend, a Saturday and a Sunday. So I came in and I made them voluntary, so people could choose if they wanted to come. And I created a program. This is a good example of a program that had, I think it was something like 16 different activities in a weekend. Still had 4 good training blocks, but there were workshops separated by weapon or by age. There was mindfulness, there was yoga, there was injury prevention, there was a talk by a parent who was in the military about the power of teamwork. We did video analysis part of the training camp. There was workshops for the trainers of the athletes as well. So I was kind of inviting the trainers to be around, even though they might not have been hired to run the camp. A lot of them were turning up for the trainer workshops, and then were just kind of being in the environment. So basically just making a more vibrant experience of these national training camps. And even though they were voluntary, guess what? The numbers at the training camp started going up, and the number of people who wanted to be part of the national squad started going up. So we ended up with something like 90 odd people in the national squad, and just a very consistent high number of people attending. My idea was how make it voluntary, and then make an experience where anyone who wasn't there felt like they were missing out. That was my philosophy. And yeah, I was completely confirmed that's a way that it can work. And we post everything we could about it on the kind of the Federation Facebook site and social media, so people could really see what they were missing out on. In terms of kind of the necessary support, this is an example I said I was going to come back to about mentoring. Mentoring is a drum that I've been banging for 8 years or so now. It is so underutilized in performance sport, in sport generally, but I think performance sport especially. We created our mentoring program, our global mentoring program, back in 2017 was the first cohort. And so we have Olympic, Paralympic level athlete, elite level mentors mentoring young mentees for an entire year, or any sports covered. We match across sports. It's quite a big commitment. They have mentoring sessions every 1 to 3 weeks, usually, but on average every 1 or 2 weeks. And we created this curriculum, kind of this holistic curriculum to go alongside the mentee. The mentors are trained to kind of guide their mentees through. And that first year we had just 7 pairs in the program. Then the next year there were 17. The year after there were 34 pairs. And now for the last 4 years, we've had about 30 to 35 pairs of athletes spread across usually 30 odd sports and something like 10 to 15 different nationalities. And it's just an incredible tool. I came in thinking about what are all the pitfalls that we just tend to see that young athletes just naturally kind of fall into along the way that we could help them avoid if we put some time and effort in. And that was the basis of the curriculum. But this idea of individualized help, especially, I think, kind of, increasingly important with the kind of youth culture today, and how the kind of mental health struggles the teenagers are going through, and especially teenage girls are going through. We need to be better at supporting them, and in an individualized way. Psychologists, they're great if you've got the money for them. Most people don't. Mentoring, there are almost an equal number of older, experienced mentors in the system within a sport or within sport generally as there are young athletes coming into the system. So it's an amazingly cost-effective way to provide really deep mental, emotional support. And what we found is that these athlete mentors are giving up sometimes hundreds of hours of their year and they're volunteers, the mentors, to help a young athlete along the way. And not only are they doing that, but then they're coming to the end of the year and finding that this was one of the most meaningful parts of their entire year, the mentor. And that's just a testament to the power of mentoring. It's an incredible tool because it develops the mentor and the mentee almost equally. And mentors often tell us that they feel like they're getting more out of the program than the mentee is. And this is like very experienced, often kind of Olympic medal winning athlete mentors, and they feel like they're developing as much as the teenage athlete that they're working with. So this is an example of a tool that can really revolutionize things. This is the program that we have, the 5 pillars of the curriculum, which is, we have performance, which is kind of pure performance psychology, identity and values, mindfulness, which is a thread that runs through all of our programs, community and responsibility, and nature and connectedness. So if you talk about a holistic program, this is clearly not just about who these young people are as athletes, but who they are as people in the society and even humans living on this planet, and how all of how they show up in those different ways feeds in and can support them performing better and being healthier and happier. I won't go through there's a couple of quotes, but I won't read through all of those. Basically, people say really lovely things about their experience when they go through the program. So developing skills that will help them in the long run. I've talked about performance psychology right from the start. I think there's not really an age that's too young to start. There's always a way. I think one of the big issues is the stigmatization of psychology that we need to break. So the earlier you can start just kind of normalizing, we train our bodies, so of course we train our minds, the better. It doesn't have to be a lot, but like with our youngest ones, they'd have a workshop probably at 3 out of 5, or maybe at each of the 5 training camps we had each year. But just that, if you can destigmatize it, normalize it from an early age, it's so important. One-to-one developmental conversations, kind of this idea of making things individualized, is is so key in this kind of new paradigm of performance sport. Athletes, where the one size fits all is, it's had its time, really. It was a part of this early era of performance sport where the coach knew best, the coach decided what everyone does, they do it, and you kind of sink or swim. And it's not the most effective, it's not the most kind of ethical, certainly. It's not the way that we want to continue. And unfortunately, it takes a lot more time. It's harder to have the more compassionate, individualized approach. It was easier to that kind of hard approach, the traditional hard approach where the coach knows best and says and just dictates what everyone will do, is easier in a lot of ways. And I think that's why it's persisted and still persists in some environments. But the compassionate approach, the more autonomous, kind of drawing in that self-determination theory where athletes have some say, you need to know who your athletes are, you need to connect with them, and they need to know that you care about them and recognize their their individual development. And I think there's a key concept of responsibility in all of this, of young athletes. I mean, it's one of the things that athletes gain, like one of the wonderful gifts that athletes gain from a career in sport is taking responsibility and understanding what that means. And there's this wonderful model that British fencing created called from athlete student to CEO. So they start with this idea of those youngest athletes, they're the student, so they have their coach, they have their family, and usually the coach and their parents are kind of saying what they should do, where they should go, where they compete, like driving them to training, that kind of thing. And then they move into this role of the apprentice, and the kind of family steps back a little bit. Now it's more the athlete and coach who have a kind of more of a partnership, and there might be some other people involved as well. There's a support team, there's the federation, and the pathway around them, but really there's this core partnership of athlete and coach. Then you've got the entrepreneur, where you've got actually the athlete in the middle, and then they've got other people kind of supporting them, feeding in. So there is the coach, the family, the support team, but now they're kind of, the athletes started to take a bit more autonomy and control, and they're at the center of their sporting journey, let's say. And then you end up as the athlete CEO, where the athlete is the one who's kind of what's the word, not directing, but conducting. They're kind of directing in a musical sense, like creating they're making the environment around them that they need. They're making sure that the right people are talking to the other right people, and that everyone's kind of connected. Think of any really, really top kind of with it senior athlete, and you'll probably see a model like that they're much more in control of what they need and who needs to be supporting them how. And I love this because it kind of points to this increasing journey of responsibility. So if we accept this as a valid or a desirable model, then we need to start purposefully giving athletes more responsibility along the way. So that also feeds into this autonomy piece, right? So they might need to start deciding how they're training or what they're training in some ways. But we can start doing that from an early age as well, I think, in smaller ways. Also a good message for parents to get, because they are often the hindrance to athletes taking responsibility when their parents are still packing their bags or driving them and picking them up at the end of the day. And then finally, this third piece, which is helping people see what's truly meaningful about their journey in sport. And like I said, I've kind of done an informal study of my friends and the people I know who've reached the pinnacle of their sporting careers. Like, what do you look back on? And yeah, really, it's the friendships they've made. It's the amazing places they've been. It's the chances they've had to give back to their community or to someone else along the journey that stands out. So if we know that, that's what you're going to get to. You can be Olympic champion, and that medal will still feel nice when you think back on it. But really, when you're pushed, the meaningful elements are these things I just mentioned. If we know that, then we can start pointing young athletes in that direction to start with. Like, there's nothing wrong with saying, look, it's great to go after the gold, but that shouldn't be the only thing. You need to have other things going on in your lives. You need to have other parts of your personality and identity, you should be studying or working or doing something alongside. If it's not that, you should have other interests, and you should be we should be providing opportunities to give back, for example. Now, I just realized I don't think I clicked share sound, but so I'm just going to come out of the and come back in again. I've got a little video to show. Oh, maybe I did. Back in the year, yeah, it must have been 2021 in the summer. I organized a very special weekend, a preseason weekend for 9 of the Danish national team, a mix of junior and senior athletes. There was no training involved, and it was quite I was pushing the boat out even for me. But I'll show you the video and hopefully it gives you a sense. But let me just do this first. Okay, from here. We took them to a place called King's Yelling. Can you hear the stirring music? So it's a very, very brief look into it, but there's a longer video that kind of documents the entire weekend. Basically, we spent this weekend around the birthplace of Denmark, which is King's Yelling, and where they have these rune stones where Denmark was written for the first time. And there's a wonderful museum there, and we had that guide from the museum who kind of followed us for the whole weekend. And there were various activities around. We did some meditations, we did some yoga on the roof, we did some kind of dialogue workshops where the athletes were discussing what was meaningful about this journey in sport. These were like 17-year-olds up to 25-year-olds, and I had no idea how they were going to take it, but I thought it was worth a shot. But I was absolutely amazed by how kind of invested and engaged they were in this entire weekend, the wildest preseason training camp they would have ever experienced without any training. But it just kind of highlighted for me that we shouldn't underestimate the kind of desire for this more meaningful approach with the athletes. Like there's much more resistance in the coaches and in the leaders than in the athletes for this kind of thing. And it was so quickly that they really understood. I've got the sense that they understood why I thought they should do this and why I thought this was a kind of a worthwhile use of their weekend. Let me go back into the slide. We're nearly at the end. No. I know what I can do. Sorry, chaps. So, and then, so in line with this idea of kind of the meaningful aspects of a athlete's journey. This is a more recent piece of work. So I don't know if anyone has come across this, the Powered by Purpose program. This is the only athlete-centered program that UK Sport offer. So the only centralized program that UK Sport offer for athletes. And it was a couple of years ago that we won the kind of the bid to be the delivery partner for UK Sport to run this program. It was off the back of this research they'd done that showed that 86% of world-class athletes want to use their platform to kind of give back, to make a difference whilst they're still competing. So we created this program of kind of workshops and mentoring and various other elements to basically to train UK Sport funded athletes to become social change makers, to become effective, compassionate, responsible social change makers. We'd just finished the second cohort, but we've had 2 cohorts of around 20 athletes going through this firstly a 6-month program, quite an intense program, workshops on things like introduction to athletes for social change, creative problem solving, creating their own brand, building their team, their community, public speaking, presentation skills, basically everything that we could think that they might need on there to become effective social change makers. And it's been just an amazing journey. We're about to kick off the 3rd cohort. There's cohorts 4 and 5 planned for after the games. But again, it points to this idea that this is a different generation. I would never have thought about doing this when I was in my early 20s. The idea of dedicating my time to become a social change maker was so far from my mind. I was still wrapped in my bubble, but this is a different generation. Athletes who are not satisfied just to be athletes and nothing else. And that's been so clear with these 2 groups that have come through so far. Just both that their kind of passion for doing more and for using their platform, but then also when you give them the kind of space and the training, in how many wonderful, creative, different directions they take it. Like the usual idea of athletes giving back is they go into a school and give a talk, or they go into a school and give a PE lesson or something like that. And when you give athletes free rein, they go in all sorts of directions, and just an amazing array. So that's about it. Just 3 short takeaways, I thought. Firstly, we need to consciously answer that question: what does society need from sport today? And then how we develop athletes needs to be in line with that updated vision for the meaning of sport. And meaningful talent development is both more ethically kind of justifiable, more sustainable, but I truly believe it can lead to better performances as well. So all the bottom lines that we care about. And that was me at the end of my journey with far more meaning at the Olympic parade. No, that wasn't the end of it, was it? That was the London Olympic parade, partway through. So how has this landed, guys? And what would you add from your own experience of this kind of seeing this, experiencing this going well, or the opposite? What have your experiences been like? And anyone who's gone off screen, do come back on so we actually have a little discussion group.
Yeah. Feel free to just unmute yourself and away or share an experience.
Laurence, thanks very much for sharing those insights. It's really interesting. I've made plenty of notes, and I don't want to take up all of the airways. I'll leave that for Dave Hembrough to do. But so I've got a few questions, but I'll stick to one, and then if time allows, or maybe a separate conversation would be good. But just going in order, you said, I think maybe when you were about 18 or when you started, that you weren't a particularly nice person, or maybe in the sport. Put it that way. I think we can probably come up with other terms that might be appropriate based on what we think about sports people at certain times. But you're in an individual sport. What I'm sold on this, by the way. So I'm just trying to see it from a developmental point of view. Is how would we maybe guide, say, athletes, particularly those that are in an individual sport, to a position where actually being a nicer person in that sense, or maybe someone who interacts with their environment a little bit more helpfully, is the better way forward?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one. And I often think back to like what would have made a difference to me as an 18-year-old, like who could have said or done something for me. I'm sure some people tried, not particularly effectively. So I mean, firstly, the idea of mentors is huge, because I think I do come back to if there was somebody, I don't remember having any kind of mentor back then anyway, even in that role. But if there was somebody that I respected and I thought I looked up to, that had kind of tried to put me on the right track, I think the message would have landed in a totally different way to my coach, my parents, anybody else really. So that idea of having older people in the environment, doesn't have to be a formal mentor, but just somebody older in the environment who's kind of shows that leadership. At the end, the message that I got in the end, it was kind of like a revelation. It was through this sports psychologist, and it was much later, so I'd matured a lot by then, but it just made a lot of sense. But it needed some talking through. So one of the revelations was, she simply said, like, Laurence, that if you lose, you don't have to be devastated. And I looked at her like, what are you talking about? You're crazy, lady. Of course you do. That's the point. When you lose, you're devastated and you try hard and you get better. But then through quite a short time after that, it just made sense, right? It was just so logical. Like, well, actually, if you're trying your best, you can't guarantee you're going to win. So losing is just part and parcel of it. Your job is to try your best, and then you can feel okay with it. So I think there's just a pretty logical argument. Like, people will get it when they presented it in the right way. It has so much to do with who the messenger is, though. Like, a parent at that age, if you're 18, is never going to get the message across. A coach could do if you've got the right relationship with them. A psychologist, I don't know if I would have listened to a psychologist either. You guys, I think you guys would be as clued up as I would be about how to do it. If we agree that it's important, then we need to figure it out. That's probably not very helpful, but but I haven't figured out what truly would help me outside of that kind of mentoring aspect.
No, thank you. That does make sense. I mean, the mentoring side of things links to something you hear about in many sports around characters or having strong leaders. And I'm a Manchester United fan, so I don't know if anyone's involved in football, but they talk about the lack of. So it's quite pertinent in that area. Laurence, did you say that you were kicked off a squad or a team?
Yeah, I was kicked out of the World Championships in the middle of my event.
Because of something relating to behavior?
I was just being really naughty, basically. Yeah.
On reflection, then, what do you think about that?
I mean, I was a complete idiot. It was totally. I mean, I was the oldest on the team. It was my last year, and I was just being. It showed how completely like unaware I was of my role, the impact on others, the impact on myself. Like that, it was just stupid fun, right? It wasn't anything like malicious. I was just being a bit of an idiot teenager, but I was already way too old for that kind of thing. So I look back and it feels like somebody else, really. But yeah, what an idiot. And I can use that. I can tell that story to athletes as well. I mean, I don't want anyone else to feel like they're like that about themselves. And so it's a good story to bring out.
I'll jump in.
Go on, Dave.
Predicted by Mark. Thank you for the presentation and giving us some insight to your background and the great work you're doing now. It's really meaningful. I've worked with British fencing quite a bit in the past. I'm in Sheffield. I trained Hussein Rukowski
Oh
for a
yeah,
while.
nice.
It was your era, and
Yeah, he was my
time.
teammate in London.
Yeah, and his older brother,
Ahmed.
and I spent a lot of time at Grantham with James Williams.
Yeah, nice.
He's
I
a
was
legend.
times as well. Yeah.
I know some of the culture that you've been exposed to, and some of the activities that take place on fencing camps. So I know in part where you come from.
And I love James Williams totally. Those Grantham camps were ridiculous. This was a military camp in Grantham, a military base that we were taken to each year, and people like dreaded it. It was like, I think I got away with just going only once, but like, why do that to young athletes? Make them dread going to a training camp?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. For Leo, the physiologist.
We might have been there the same year then, because I was there when Leo was there one year.
I suspect so. So yeah, I've got a background like you in performance sport, and was at 2012 Games with GB Women's Volleyball. I was at Commonwealth Games, and my work now, as much as we're a talent academy at British Weightlifting, I sort of flip some of the perspectives or the vantage points that you presented, and not by way of a challenge, but it's not how elite sport can produce better people, but it's just how sport can produce better people. And a big part of metal, it isn't necessarily about talent pathway. That's a destination for some of the athletes that we train, but I'm sure others on the call feel really strongly about this, that our club offer is somewhat broader, and talent and performance and output is a destination for a very small minority, and many others, so many more of our program participants are never going to be the best in the country, the best at the weight class, the best in the room. So I'm really interested in using that sport as a vehicle for social change and personal development, and retaining athletes in our program who may not be competitive and therefore the athletes, or they're just recreational participants, and that's okay. And so we're figuring that out in Sheffield, how to do that, but also how to manage those two sort of polarized spaces. Boxing is a classic sport, does that really terribly, that they've got performance boxing clubs, or they've got social boxing clubs that do great amount of community work, but very few boxing clubs do both. So I'd just be interested in your sort of reflections on that of inverting the model that you presented. I know that's based on your experience and your role now, but also the role of sport broader, and how a club, particularly us guys who are talent academy coaches, as part of the pathway, but we're in our own towns, our own locations, wanting to do good things in the spaces that we're in, contributing to British weightlifting, athlete pool and future success. But I know Zoe in particular, but others will feel really strongly about what I'm saying. So what are your thoughts on what I've just sort of talked about there, and any sort of guidance or examples of programs that do both well, so a broad question here.
So completely agree, and in TAP we're definitely not a performance sport organization. We work from grassroots all the way up, so we work with community sports centers and schools, and our idea is this idea of the true athlete is nothing to do with the level you're at. So our mentoring program there's no level that you need to be at to be brought on as a mentee, and it really is some who are just kind of starting to compete locally, and others who have been to an Olympics already. The idea is you're committed to sport. It doesn't matter what level you are. You can be a true athlete. You can give back. You can have an incredible effect on those around you. And the fact that we never know when athletes are going to, whatever stage they're at, who's going to have the biggest impact, the biggest positive impact. It's not necessarily the stars who are going to be a great impact. It could be the ones who drop out at 15, become a coach, set up their own club, and then they're impacting far more people than the star getting medals. So and examples of where it is done well. So where I live in Denmark, the entire sports system is set up around these there is a club system. So athletes go to clubs, they stay in clubs all the way through their careers up until Olympic level. Very few centralized programs, like only a couple badminton and one or two others will have centralized. Everyone else, they stay in their club. They're volunteer-led clubs. So it's both the community club and where the elite athletes are training. And it's like a bedrock of Danish society, actually, this club system. It's one of the pillars of Danish society. It's an amazing example. It's an amazing model that it just really works. And there you have the athlete mentors, role models in the same space as the kids or even the adult kind of hobby competitors or hobbyists. And it really is an amazing, an amazing environment. So yeah, I kind of live in that example of how it can be done well.
Sounds great. It sounds very similar to Ireland in the GAA scenario, where
I've just heard about GAA. What the vibe in GAA? It sounds unbelievable. Really community minded.
Everyone in the community gets involved. Everyone contributes, supports financially or personally. Yeah, really good. Thank you. And sorry if there's a misposition in there that the term athlete, to take that then and not focusing it absolutely on elite performance and being just competitively active but broader. That's a stigma and a stereotype that you challenge, I guess. I've just dropped in the chat an initiative that I'm driving in Sheffield. So I know a lot of what you talk about as sport for development, not sport for performance or sport for sport's sake. And we've got an initiative where we're promoting Sheffield to be the first national city of sport for development, where sport is used purposefully for social change. Wow. So we've got a session at something called the Festival of Debate, where we're presenting that. We're going to get some feedback, and hopefully, if that goes well, we're going to launch that later in the year. Purposefully using sport for social outcomes, and we'll create a few athletes and competitors on the way through. So nice. That's in the link if anyone wants to see it.
I'd love to follow that along. If it kicks off, would love to be involved, I reckon. Nice, Dave. Anybody else?
Laurence, I've got a few questions, but I won't ask them all because I'll take up too much of your time at this stage. I'll try a different tactic, it's okay. And one of the questions that I was asking was around, so the demographic that we work with on the pathway to, on the regional camps, you could have youngsters, maybe 13, typically, that would be around about lower ages. And then it takes us up to youth under 17, juniors, under 20s, under 23s, into seniors. But we're looking at the way we structure the camps, particularly for the youth demographic. So let's just say for this, let's say under 18s, between youth and junior. You showed us an example of the camp structure when you went to Denmark, and how that changed, and it was pretty substantial change. If I was to ask you what are the key things you did to make the camps more enjoyable, improve that experience, what would they be?
Well, I think you'd see all the elements that I've just been talking about. So I brought in, basically I had this idea that I wanted it to be an experience that they would choose. And if they didn't get to go, they'd look in and be jealous of the people who got there. So, but also, what are the things that I can provide with the budget that I had that they would never get in their clubs? So I only had them for a weekend. Like the training they get, okay, it's better than in their clubs because they're all together. So there has to be some of that. But like they would never get yoga or mental training, or I brought in an Aikido instructor for a weekend once. We did breath work, like all these things to try and broaden their understanding of what they're involved in, also to get them interested in other parts of being an athlete. So that there's this kind of mental side, there's an emotional side, there's even a spiritual side to it. I did bring in, we had to cancel it in the end. I booked a ballet instructor to come for an entire weekend and do a series of workshops with them, because ballet and fencing have quite a lot in common, actually. And we had to cancel it because of COVID. We never got to do that one. But so yeah, what are the things that I mean, it also had to be tough. Like I wanted them to finish the weekend. So I guess I had some principles. I wanted them to finish the weekend totally shattered. Like I've spent everything. I I wanted to challenge them. I wanted to broaden their understanding, their experience. I wanted it to be really inclusive. So I ended up we had quite tough barriers for like bars to get selected for European and World Championships, but to get into the national squad, it was pretty loose, actually. It was kind of like, if you thought you were at their level, if we thought along with their coach they were, then they could come along. With a little bit strict on that, but it was quite open at that level, because I wanted them to come into that environment and feel like, wow, this is a super cool place. I want to be at these training camps, and then train with the ones who are going to the Europeans and the Worlds and think, oh, I'd like to get that tracksuit. So I guess it was kind of based around those principles, and I'd always run workshops on some of these theories, philosophies of mine. I used it as a bit of as a lab, because I was also starting in tap, and so we were having all these wonderful ideas, and then I could just put them into effect like the next month in a training camp. So it was a pretty cool time. Anything there that rings a bell, Mark? Anything that you think you can steal?
Yeah, I'm very much on the same page. So it's interesting. It's nice in some ways that some of the things you brought up, I think we have integrated to some degree already, or we are aiming to integrate more of. I think one of the biggest challenges that I think that I would speak to personally is pitching it at the right level. And okay, you're not going to be able to pitch it to everyone, especially with the resources that we have. Sometimes you talked about the individual aspect, and that's really important. Some of the things that we do has to be a little bit more general, because it might be like a workshop, so you're not going to get a one-to-one workshop, but we might have a group-based workshop.
Yeah.
And it's that balance, isn't it? I had a conversation with Chris, who was actually on the call for a little while. I think he's got a physio appointment, so he couldn't stay on the call. But it was like the things that he's doing now, training towards the potential of an Olympic place, the things that we've been dropping in for the last 6-7 years, and trying to plant the seed. But it's taken time for that to maybe grow. And it's like, goes back to your point, is that how much of that are we responsible for, where we go, do you know what, we just need to develop the systems, and we need to role model these things. We need to have the people in place that kind of guide, but also appreciative of the fact that it's going to take people a certain amount of time to come to any realization. So, I imagine when I was 18, I think I was personally pretty open to different things around performance. But if someone had come and said, right, here's a mindfulness coach, or here's X, Y, Z, like you, I think I would like to think I'd have been a bit more open to it. But in a team setting, I don't know. And so pitching that at the right level is a challenge. The mentoring point I think is a really important one. And we've done some work with a mindfulness coach who worked with Harlequins. And when you see that he's had buy-in from Marcus Smith or some of the lads at Harlequins, that's an easy sell, isn't it? Because it reduces the stigma of that. So that's possibly something that we maybe do in a manner, but maybe we could probably structure in a way that was a little bit, I would say, formalized, but just from a systems point of view, just making sure those contacts can take place in a beneficial way.
Yeah, the splitting up by group, by age is important. So in that program I had, one day was split by weapon. There are 3 weapons in fencing, and the next day was split by age. So yeah, it's one really easy way to turn athletes off in a camp like that, is when you pitch things too low for the senior guys, or vice versa. So I was really aware of making sure that the bits that they had to do, I mean, they kind of had to do what was on the schedule, but that it was not going to boil the pants off them.
Just on that, Laurence, so when you said splitting, you've got by age, maybe by discipline as well. Was there splitting of male, female at any point?
Sometimes, yeah. So we had some female kind of workshops as well for just the girls. Got some of the older women female athletes to run sessions for the younger ones. Yeah, I mean, almost as much as I could, I would split up kind of as resources would allow. And especially when it comes to the extracurricular stuff, then I would that's where it needs to be more specific. Like, so yeah, all the ways, age, gender, and weapon for us, I would be separating out where I could.
Great, thanks, Laurence. Thanks for the feedback.
I'll just jump on after being name dropped by Dave. We're a BWL Talent Academy, but we're slightly set up differently to most of the other clubs. And we focus on social outcomes for everything. So we focus on the athlete as an entire person. So some of the stuff you're saying we do workshops, we do extracurricular activities, but we also build a network around our young people. We've got a junior committee because for us it's really important for our young people to have a voice, because it's all very well me saying we're going to do yoga this week and then nobody turns up. So we ask them what they want to do, what do they like doing. We've built really strong networks with parents, with schools, we have an on-site counsellor. The kids can access counselling here. We can put referrals in. We work with social services. We can put referrals in for kids if they need extra support. So we really focus on, yes, don't get me wrong, I'd love to have a fantastic weightlifting athlete. However, that's not my end goal. I want nice human beings. And we have a gym, we have a facility, a weightlifting gym, but we also have a sensory room so our kids can go and unwind, they can relax. And we feel it's really, really important that to keep our kids. I've been set up as an individual club for 3 years, and I've got 37 kids. I think I've lost 2 in 3 years, because we build relationships with their families. We involve the families, our parents, our grandparents volunteer. They come in, they put pictures up for me because I'm really bad at DIY. They do stuff around the gym, and we've built families. We share lifts to competitions, kids pass on their shoes to other kids. Some of our young people aren't going to be the best weightlifters in the world, but they have a real talent for coaching. So we use the teenagers as coaches for the younger kids, and we develop those skills. We're working with an ASDAN project at the minute to try and get a qualification, because we work in quite a deprived area. And I work a lot with the police, with children that have got antisocial behaviour orders and have a lot of problems. And some of our kids that we get will never get a qualification, but they're amazing coaches. They're amazing at coaching people. They've got social skills. They've got math skills. They can work out they can't do an equation, but they can work out what's on the bar and what weight's needed to, go up a weight. And they're all things that need to be recognised. So as a club, that's pretty much what we like to focus on. And
so then you're the living, breathing example of this meaningful approach to sport.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we wanted to create. We've got 4 different coaches here, and we're all really, really different coaches. And the kids will have a coach that they bond with, that they work with. And we wanted to create a place where a young person could turn up. The doors are always open. They can turn up at any time and work with somebody.
It wouldn't surprise me, Zoe, if in 5 to 7 years' time, your club was also one of the top performance clubs in the country, because that's our approach. This is what we're saying, is that approach that you're taking is the most likely to develop really strong athletes as well, because they want to stay, they want to train, they train in the right ways, they're supported well.
We can't get rid of them. They have 4 sessions a week. They're here every day. They're always here.
There's that example of the Erling Haaland's football club in Norway, where they were just a kind of community-based club, no performance focus at all, and they've churned out some of the best footballers in the world.
Yeah, we've got some great lifters with some great talent, but when they develop, I've got coaches in from other areas to coach them, because it's not my love. I've got a passion for coaching kids, but I don't want to just streamline them too much. But when they get older and they can, they want to go down that pathway, they can work with clubs from other, work with coaches from other clubs, and I'm quite happy to pass them on, because it's not what I want to do. I just want rounded, happy, nice 18-year-olds.
One thing I would say, Zoe, though, is by the time they get to like 15, 16, what's fun for a person of that age is kind of development and getting better and sometimes competing. So if there isn't that there, then they might lose the motivation, because that becomes the fun for some people.
What we've done is we've got a coach in from a nearby university, and he's taking the children who want to, or the young people who want to go on an athletic development plan, and he's programming them and working with them. So they've still got that in the club environment amongst their teammates. So it's still there. Yeah, wow. Outcomes is definitely something we are have in common with Dave. And I do think it works really well to focus on the whole person,
nice,
rather than just focus. One of the areas we struggled with, we had a few older teens that were absolutely devastated, like life ruined, when they didn't do well at a competition. So we worked with sports psychologists to teach them that actually, do you know what, it happens. But that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because as an athlete myself, I can get devastated at competition, but then I can go, well, actually, this is why I did it. This is what I can learn from, and I can move on. But when you're 15, 16, 17, it's not quite so easy, is it?
I cried almost every time I lost. Last time I cried was at age 25 after a senior World Cup in Germany. So I know that feeling very well.
I still cry when I lose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Really interesting.
Thanks, Joey. I think we'd probably better
wrap it up. Name drop your psychologist, though. You mentioned that you've had a great female psych that helped you so much.
Yeah, I've named her all over the place. So Katie Warriner.
Okay. Shout out, big up Katie Warriner.
Yeah. I've written tons about her. She's in the book, so she knows I rave about her. But yeah, Nico, I think we better wrap up this section, and I better go and make some dinner for the kids.
Yes, mate, absolutely. I think as a closing statement, because I think this has been incredibly valuable. Thank you, Laurence, for your time, for your input on these. And if I may, from my end, and also speaking to the work that talent academies and in case currently, since everyone is in inclusion academies, do it's very much 3 bigger variables that go into the work we do. And we, of course, have the performance side of things, where it's athlete development, but that is not to neglect the other 2 big points, which is youth weightlifting development, youth engagement, is what that means. So we have a lot of community work to do. It's the clubs that are very engaged in finding youth lifters by going to schools and getting more people excited about strength sport, weightlifting with the space in the middle, so just the sport of strength and the health that comes with it. And then thirdly, coaching development as well. So Zoe, what you speak to is like developing an athlete is as valuable as developing a coach that might then 10 years down the line find the next gold medalist for our sport. So it's all incredibly valuable. And as talent academies, we have there's the Venn diagram has quite a lot of overlap there between all of those things that we talk about. So the club development in regards to the meaningful approach and creating a club environment that fosters fun and engagement and ultimately retention, therefore. So again, you've spoken to having only lost 2 athletes in your time, which is incredible. What a statistic, right? And the more cohesion and the more retention you can build in a club, ultimately that is what's needed in order to grow elite performance out of a club. Laurence spoke to it, and we all know that the percentage of lifters that would come to a club and excel at the highest level is always going to be low, just because elite performance isn't for everyone. It's not everyone's cup of tea. It's a long-term process. So you have to stay within the club environment for a certain amount of time to even get a chance at the whole thing. So for those present and also for those that are then going to listen to the recording, I think that a big takeaway from Laurence's talk and of the subject is that in order to get to the point of maybe finding that gem that can compete at the highest level, they need to come out of a club that is healthy, and that means healthy as a business. So retention is high, it's healthy for the athlete, so it doesn't run them down and grind them to the ground. It fosters their engagement, and healthy for the overall sport, meaning that it grows, it gets the word out there. We have so much outreach work there. Dave mentioned his earlier, so it's really wonderful stuff that's going on there. And I think that's aligns well with what we hear about the True Athletes Project. So I'm very happy we had you here, Laurence. Thank you very much for that.
Nice. Cheers, Nico. Cheers, guys. Thanks for your time. I'm gonna leave you. Love you. Bye.
Yeah.
Then.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for
Thanks
turning on, Nico.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
coming on, Nico.
See you later. Bye bye.